Hey everyone, welcome to Electoral Dysfunction, a show where comedians and experts debate the news of the week from the safety of their quarantines. I'm Tom Brennan. Happy Easter if you celebrate. Happy Passover if you celebrate. Happy Sunday if you don't celebrate any of those things. We're really excited to have you here. For those of you who've never seen our show before, we started in a 90-seat theater in Midtown Manhattan, and now we're here in my bedroom in the Bronx. So that's quarantine life for you. We got a great panel today. I'm not going to waste any time. Ned Thorne, star wipe me to the guest. Joining us now, the host of the Rand Experience, Axel Rand. Axel, thank you so much for joining us. Where are you right now?
I'm in an undisclosed location, Tom.
Well, I'm
on a need-to-know basis. Unknown.
None of us need to know, so I appreciate you joining us and making the time. So you've been referred to as sort of like the conspiracy theorist's conspiracy theorist. You are someone who looks past what the government's telling us, what the news is telling us. You look for the truth.
You mean the lamestream media, Tom? You're part of that.
I certainly am. I would not disagree. That is
I have never believed a single thing that I've read in a book, nor have seen on TV.
Nothing at all.
Not a single thing. So it's all part of a grand conspiracy, Tom.
So in your estimation, JFK still alive?
JFK was assassinated by his own people, who also happened to work for the mob, who also were in bed with both the Russians and Cuba.
That's a pretty big bet.
Luckily, he escaped that assassination.
Wow.
At least his brain did.
All right. Where is his brain now?
In an undisclosed location, Tom. Unknown. You don't need to know. You're part of the lamestream media.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All I can say is there's a reason why the Kennedys keep going missing.
It's a dark ending to that sentiment. So talk to me about COVID-19. We're in the middle of maybe the greatest economic crisis, greatest health crisis, nearly half.
Or as I call it, the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people.
All right, so COVID-19 is a hoax, Axel. Take us through why. How is it a hoax?
First off, COVID-19 stands for Communist Overlords Viral Insurrection of Our Democracy. 19.
Well, what does the 19 stand for?
The 19th year of the new millennium.
It's 2020, Axel.
The year 2000 doesn't count.
Airtight. Logic checks out. All right. So you think it's all made up? It's not really happening, or is it really happening and just, it has been forced upon us? Walk us through it. So is this China behind it? Russia's behind it?
First off, I've been in my underground bunker for the past 3 months. I've brought in no new media. I've read nothing. I've watched nothing. I get every single bit of information from inside sources. And here's what I can tell you. The government of the United States teamed up with the government of China, the government of the United Kingdom, the government of Canada, and the government of Mexico to perpetrate the greatest hoax on the American people. Have you noticed that there's not a single bit of COVID outbreak in the Southern Hemisphere, Tom?
I didn't notice that, and I'm not 100% sure that that's accurate, but go ahead.
That's 100% accurate.
All right.
Well, unless you count
in front of me, so.
Unless you count Nigeria, Australia, and New Zealand.
And you don't count those?
Australia and New Zealand aren't technically part of the Southern Hemisphere. And Nigeria, you could, depending upon where you stand.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, I stand in the place where they're definitely south, but you know what?
That's because you're part of the lamestream media.
I am part of the lamestream media. I cannot deny that. That's it's my middle name.
This is a hoax perpetrated by these countries. Look what has happened. All of our individual liberties have been taken away. You're sitting at home. You're allowing yourself to sit at home. You've had your job taken away. You've had your money taken away. And all you're doing is you're waiting for your little friend Andrew Cuomo, Italian Cuomo, part of the mafia connected to JFK. JFK's brain is still alive. Cuomo is telling you what you can do next. He's connected with Donald Trump, bump, cocaine, CIA, the United States of America. The borders in Mexico are now open unless you're an American trying to go to Mexico. What do you say to that, Tom Brennan? Use your logic now, Mr. Ivy League.
I mean, I don't know if Drexel University is in the Ivy Leagues, but
You went to a university. I dropped out of high school when I realized they were teaching me lies.
What was the biggest lie in high school that you didn't care
about? The biggest lie in high school was that you could make yourself into anything you wanted.
Oh, wow. That is a dark close to that sentiment.
Also, we
Axel,
hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created equal. All men are created equal unless you're a white man, and then you're expected to go in the back of the line.
I don't know if that's 100% true. And in fact, I would say
That's because you read books.
I do read books, but I read an article this week in the New York Times that said that
The New York lies.
You got me. Yeah, it fucks me. So, that was nothing. That alarm certainly wasn't the government.
Have you been listening to this conversation?
Me or the government?
The government. You are the government.
I cannot. That's a need to know basis. Oh, we lost Axel.
What are you doing?
I'm not doing anything at all.
What are you doing, Tom? What are you doing to my video?
I've done nothing to your video. We have not, us here at the World News Headquarters of Electoral Dysfunction have done nothing to your video.
Are you part of the government, Tom? Are you part of the one world conspiracy? I'm
certainly not part of that government. Axel, we're just about out of time. Before we get going, you lost him again. Anything you want to plug or promote to the people before we call it a day?
You can find me on the one piece of media I actually use, which is the Instagram, or as I call it, the Insta Lies, under the Axel Rand Experience. You can also see a person who I am in contact with in the outside world, Chris Booth, on his newest show, the Conspiracy Booth, 7:30 p.m. Monday night.
All right, Zoom. On Zoom.
On a secure Zoom channel.
Yeah.
Not controlled by the government, not controlled by the lamestream media.
No penis is getting drawn on you in that Zoom conversation.
I cannot promise that.
Well, Axel, I'd like to say it was a pleasure to see you, except for the racism. And we wish you well. Stay safe out there.
There's nothing racist about the truth. And before I go, I just want everyone listening that I have anti-COVID vitamins available on my website, axelrandexperience.com. You can also get hats and mugs. They make great Christmas presents. Christmas, Tom. Am I allowed to say Christ?
The mugs are very nice. I have to give you that. Axel, thank you so much for joining us on Electoral Dysfunction. Ned Thorne.
God bless
you. Star wipe me to the panel. All right, join me in welcoming our panel. First up, she's a very funny comedian who has an awesome background resume, both The Daily Show and the United States Marine Corps. Justine Davie back on the show. Hey, Justine, how are you?
Hi, great to be here.
Good to have you back. A columnist and writer who's worked for America Magazine and all kinds of great stuff. Our old pal and one of my favorite human beings, Jim McDermott. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Tom. Great to be with you.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Very funny comedian. You can catch her on Barely Making It every Wednesday on Instagram. Is that correct, Megan? I didn't write down the day. Megan O'Malley. Hey, Megan.
Hey, how's it going?
Another very funny comedian and actor. Her new movie Faceblind Love is now up online. You can find it on her website, michellefThomas.com. Michelle Thomas. Hi, Michelle.
Shimon.
And of course, our buddy, our pal, editorial columnist for the New York Daily News and hated by the left and the right, Robert George.
Hey.
So welcome back, everyone. Here we are. We mentioned at the top of the show, when we started doing Electoral Dysfunction, we did it in comedy clubs and theaters, and now we do it from our bedrooms. Week 4, which this week my wife explicitly said we've been quarantined and cooped up and staying at home for 4 weeks. And I was like, it has not been 4 weeks. And I looked at the calendar and it has been 4 weeks. Still, I believe almost more than half the planet under some form of stay-at-home orders. We're starting to see school closures for various states, including Pennsylvania, and to be determined some states north of that as of this recording. And the situation is getting, it's seemingly getting better, though, or at least we're starting to see positive trends in terms of infection, but we're still, I think it was someone at Mount Sinai Hospital said yesterday, we are at the end of the beginning of this process, which is good, but that means we've still got 2/3 to go. And this week, particularly, it came to the surface in the conversations about COVID-19 is we're starting to see real numbers, and thus because we're seeing real numbers, we're seeing some real disparities when it comes to treatment and to care, particularly on the lines of race and gender. And Robert, you pulled some stats on this, and I think it's an important thing to talk about. So, Robert, talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of the official stats that we're starting to see come out.
Well, in some of the most extreme cases, and by that we'll take a look at Louisiana and Chicago, and I believe Detroit. You have these situations where African Americans are like approximately like 30 or at most like 40% of a given population, but the fatality rate in the context of the coronavirus is as much as 70% in those areas. I mean, it's the kind of swath that it's taking within the Black population is horrific. In New York, where I am, despite my Golden Gate background here.
Good job throwing people, Robert. Thanks.
Well, I'm trying to be a little bit, just trying to show people exactly how far we can go with this thing. In New York, it's slightly more balanced. I mean, if you would, balance is not the best word, but the numbers are not quite as drastic. African Americans in New York City are about 22 to 24% of the population, and the fatality rate is around 28 or 29. So it's a little bit more comparable, but it is still notable. Hispanics, it's also the case where in New York, at least, it's about like 5 or 6%. The number of fatalities are higher than their percent of the population. It is slightly under for whites in New York and a lot further on for Asians. So the questions that are naturally arise are, why are those numbers there?
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, I think particularly, speaking from myself, I think, there's a very it is the dumbest question that can be asked, but it's the question that we don't talk enough about. It's like, why is this happening? And I think particularly those of us who fancy ourselves like woke white good people, understand like academically disparities, but when you see it this up front, particularly at a time when I would say getting information to the public has been a challenge, but not as hard as it's been in previous times. Why is it happening this way? What don't people like me know and should know?
Well, I mean, just very, very quickly, you've got the basic issue that this virus is attacking the elderly, and in that case, it's almost an equal opportunity destroyer, but particularly those with underlying health conditions. And in a number of African Americans historically have higher numbers of asthma, hypertension, respiratory
issues, etc. But I
I'm
will say,
Michelle,
that the reason why we usually have higher numbers of those things is not just because in some cases, yes, we are genetically predisposed, but also because of living conditions. You are going to be higher exposed, or have the higher possibility rather of having asthma if you live in an environmentally unsound place. And usually that is the case of low-income families, particularly for those in African-American and Latino communities. Furthermore, if you are living in a situation where you have multiple generations living all in the same house, on top of each other, barely sharing like a 2-bedroom apartment for like 6 or so people, then yeah, if you have multiple people in that family that are of age and working, and if they're working as an essential worker, I'm sorry that I use those air quotes, but just the fact that like they have to put their lives on the line in terms of like being the cashier, you know, like, or postal workers or transit workers and that sort of thing. Like, think about when's the last time you went to the grocery store. Who was that person? What did they look like? Chances are they were a Black or brown person that was a cashier, and they are being exposed constantly to other people that are coming in and out of the store. And, you know, they're bringing that back to their homes because they don't have any other choice. They have to work because they have to support their family. So when you have an environment like that, then yeah, the fatalities are going to be higher. Just point blank fact.
And I don't think you need to apologize at all for using the air quotes, because it is not lost on me that, you know, I think a year ago before this happened, if you said to someone, do you think grocery store workers are essential workers? You'd be like, nah, not them. But now we're seeing they are, and yet they sure don't get paid like they're essential.
Right.
And
exactly.
I think that's the thing about this crisis. I think it's highlighted a great deal of our problems. Like, it's putting everything is heightened. You know, we're now seeing, like, this is a problem, like exactly as you're talking about, these living conditions. Like, always knew it was a problem, but now, particularly if you're telling people you have to stay home, it's like, well, home might not be safe, and yet it might be, but it's the safest place, but you know, it's a zero in a world of negatives. And I want to make sure we get everyone else hearing this. I think when you look at I wonder if we think that these rates being highlighted, and they, I think, are more than I thought they would be. You know, I think there's still always going to be a certain amount of, like, you know, there's still going to be a conversation that gets pushed aside by the media because the media is frightened by it or doesn't know what to do with it. I was impressed to see governors sort of take the lead with this, particularly our governor here in New York State, put these issues out. Do we think that this could lead to any kind of pragmatic change or like practical change off of this kind of event?
One would hope, I'm just going to jump in real quick and
Sure,
not
of course.
go on with it, but one would hope. But, you know, a funny thing that I was watching, so Sean P. Diddy Combs has his own media platform called Revolt, and I commend him for doing it, because a lot of the things that we're seeing in regular mainstream media is not like addressing any of the concerns that we as Black and brown people have. And so he specifically had a panel on, it's on YouTube, you can still watch it, called State of Emergency, State of Black America and the Coronavirus. And specifically, one of the panelists discussed how, you know, back in the 80s when we had the HIV/AIDS epidemic, it was a thing that was like, you know, it affected many people, but by and large, it got attention because of white male artists that were, you know, like had relationships with more prominent people. But as it started to also affect Black gay men, especially, like the uproar, the outrage around like finding a cure for it sort of like kind of like receded. And yes, we do have great strides now in terms of people being tested as undetected, but basically what I'm saying in terms of like tying it back to our coronavirus is that right now it's like everyone is experiencing it literally around the world. But my concern is like what's going to happen, you know, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where like it's still lingering in these populations that from the get-go didn't have enough resources to fight it, like your Louisiana, like your Detroit, you know, like your Chicago, etc.
I think one of the frustrating elements of this, and I don't, forgive me, I don't want Michelle and I to dominate this. I want everybody to because this is something that
I'll get there. I'll do my job and moderate.
but it was a little bit frustrating on Friday when at the coronavirus task force meeting. This question came up, and the Surgeon General Jerome Adams, who is an African American, was asked about this, and he, I mean, in fairness, he gave a little bit of his life story. He talked about the fact that he's had asthma. He's had asthma his entire life. Like I was very fortunate. My last asthmatic attack as a child was when I was about 12 years old. But when I had it, it was like really, it was really intense, to a point where, given this pandemic, I kind of worry about is my, you know, are my lungs still compromised from that? So that's cautionary. So he did talk about that, but then he kind of want to put in this context of, well, you know, avoid alcohol, avoid smoking, and avoid drugs. Now, that's a statement that you expect a Surgeon General to say to everybody, and say that's something that everybody needs to keep in mind. But asked in that question, and he then went on to talking about, oh, you know, call your abula and your pop.
Yeah, pop.
I mean, if he was addressing a black church tomorrow and so forth, and was having this kind of a conversation, you know, it would be fine. And everybody said, oh yeah, you know, we understand that. But when you're the Surgeon General and you're being asked about it in this kind of a context, a number of people started to say, well, you know, here he is, you know, in a sense, almost suggesting that these high numbers, it has to do with the way black people are comporting themselves. It's because of their too much smoking, they're too much of this, all that, without putting it into that broader context that Michelle was talking about. And by the way, something that I haven't heard anybody else mention yet either is, if you want to talk about personal behavior, African Americans per capita tend to go to church more than white people do. And one of the things that we've been finding out about this disease is that some of the clusters that have helped perpetrate it are churchgoers. That's why there's a big fight this Easter weekend about whether people should be going to church, and many people in the South wanting to defy that and so forth. So we can look at the fact that African Americans and Latinos are more essential workers, and thus they're more exposed. But also, the other side of it is they give praise and they go to church more, and that ironically, tragically, has also exposed them. So I mean, that is something that the Surgeon General could have also added into the conversation to help spread the.
I love the idea of the Surgeon General offering a warning against church.
Also, to add to that, in the clip, I didn't see the whole press conference. I've been like limiting my feed of like entire press conferences because it is overwhelming after a while. But of the clip that I saw of the young lady, the news reporter that tried to hack a follow-up question.
Michiel Sindor,
yes. She said basically, like, you know, who were you addressing that to? And he gave a little bit more context, and he said that he has been in contact with the NAACP all week, and they said that they told him that they would like to see him addressing the African American community more. So his justification was like, I'm using that language because I know that is the language that our people use. But it would have also I'm assuming he didn't give that broader context in real time when he was making those statements of like, you know, talk to your abuela, your pop-up, your etc. You know, context is everything. So like, don't just give part of the, you know, the information that you think is relevant, because all information is relevant.
I think so. Let's pivot off of that, because I think the sentiment about this weekend being a weekend for faith and gatherings, and that helping two causes as well, is, I think, an interesting thing to talk about. And it's a challenging thing, right? Because like, imagine a world where you're like, whatever you do, don't be with people you love talking about the goodness of mankind. But I think we've had a sort of muted conversation about it. And Jim, I'd like to bring you in here because I forgot to mention this at the top, that your day job is that of a Jesuit priest, which great vacation time situation, right?
Yeah, it's lots of R&R right now. It's amazing.
But what do you, from where you sit, like how do you feel about how this has been messaged out in terms of going to events, and staying away from faith events, and how do you feel about how it's been received by communities from your vantage point?
Well, I think I'd say that it seems to me that, going the Easter, whether it's Easter or Passover really, which are both taking place right now, the Triduum, there's that sense of like, we want to be together. This is an expression of our faith. But it seems to me that in this moment, I wish part of the message that would be said by religious leaders more than political ones is it's also an expression of your faith to not be together in a situation like this. It's an expression of trust that God can be with us in a different way. We don't have to be, if it's dangerous to the community and to not just our faith community, but to the broader community, that it's better for us to stay home and discover other ways that God can be present. I don't count on political leaders, especially the current political leaders, to even understand most of those words, but religious leaders should appreciate that in this circumstance, it's really incumbent upon them to take a stand like that, to help their people to do what will save them literally and save other people as well. That's kind of my take on it.
It's a good take.
Yeah. Can I?
Sure, please go ahead, Michelle. Yeah.
I feel so. I'm not a priest, but I grew up believing in Christ, so that would make me by default a Christian. But I feel that because I went to parochial school, it was like ingrained in us to like literally actually study the Bible, right? It was like a part of our coursework. And what I'm feeling in my heart when I hear about, these priests, pastors rather, that are being defiant is like, if you're a pastor, so two things. Number one, you're like kind of, the analogy is like you're a shepherd, right? A good shepherd. Like God is our shepherd, but also individual priests, individual pastors are what they call like, a shepherd over a flock, over a congregation. And part of being a shepherd is looking out for dangerous situations and making sure that your flock, if it was an actual shepherd taking care of sheep, you're making sure that like the wolves don't come and like, tear them away or eat them or whatever, or they don't fall off a cliff or whatever it is. And by them not like serving that role as a shepherd, they're leading them literally into danger and can cause way more harm than good from like a spiritual enrichment. The other thing too is like, I would have to assume that if pastors are ascribing to the teachings of God, that they also believe a thing called the Bible, which is inspired by God,
good read,
written by the hand of man, right? And so in the Word of God, we have also rules, the 10 Commandments for one. And we also have ministers that were elected to go out and to continue the ministry of Christ. And for example, Paul being one of the ministers that everybody loves to remember in these big faith-based congregation churches is because, like he was the man that like was converted, on his way to Damascus, and he like literally saw the light, and he became, a vehement follower of God, blah, 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 etc. But you know what one thing is, what's good? The word still lives. And I just want to read real quick, Romans chapter 13.
Take us to church.
Wow.
Submit
It's the
to
most religious issue
government.
I've ever gotten.
Okay. Hey, I don't bring it up often because
Please.
I know that
Do it.
like comedy and God, talking about God, you know, often people like turn their nose up to it. But yeah, I have to like acknowledge that I do have this knowledge, and, you know, our people perish for lack of knowledge. So if you are going to like say like you follow the Lord in all of the aspects of it. And part of that, like I said, was a letter to the Romans from Paul in the book of Romans, the New Testament. The whole chapter is basically, there are like a couple chapters that he wrote on how Christians should behave in society. And one chapter that he wrote is chapter 13, Romans, submit to government, right? Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on them who practice evil. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. Now, that last part, I think, speaks volumes, because like if this man or these people, however many pastors, decide to go ahead and have in-person services, just that part, the last part alone, for conscience sake, you must be subject for conscience sake. And then they come and find out that the people that attended their services, the majority of them were infected or worse, died. That's going to be on his conscience or their conscience. And I feel that that's, you know, going to be a way worse, you know, thing that you're going to have to contend with than anything that we can do. But it shouldn't have to get to that point is my point. And, you know,
Right.
if you say, you know, like you said, if we believe in God, believe in the word of God as well. And it was written for a reason.
I mean,
You know,
I
there's
have,
that
go
old
ahead, Jim.
joke. There's that old joke about a guy. There's a flood. There's a flood coming to into a part of a town, and the neighbor tells the guy, "You better get out of town. That flood's gonna reach all the way to here." And the guy says, "No. I trust in God. It's all gonna be okay." And then the flood comes. So, and he doesn't leave. He just goes into the house, to the roof, and just sort of assumes that it's gonna be okay. And then a boat comes and says, "Dude, you got to get on the boat because that flood's gonna take your house completely away." And he says, no, I'm just going to trust in God. And the waters go higher. And then a helicopter comes and says, "Jesus Christ, what are you still doing on top of that house? Get in the helicopter." And he says, no, I trust in God. And then he dies and he goes to heaven. And the first thing he does is he says to God, "Where were you?"
Yeah.
And God's like, "I sent you the neighbor. I sent you the boat. I sent you the helicopter. What the hell more did you need?"
Yeah. The Holy Spirit, God doesn't help us just through like miraculous like interventions. The divine intervention is knowledge. The divine intervention is man helping man on earth. So, you know, by knowledge, you know, we can do all things. But if you know, it says our people perish for lack of knowledge. And, you know, if you want to go ahead and risk your life on this glorious next morn Sunday, as we celebrate the rise of our Savior and also Passover, the angel of death passing over the doors and not, you know, taking the kids, the kids.
Yep.
That's
how that story goes. Moses says, "Not
Literally,
the
that's
kids."
word for word, I think.
No, it was the angel of death passing over, right? But anyway,
It's all about protecting the kids. Jim, by the way, my mom's going to kill me for putting you in a position to say Jesus Christ in vain on my show. I want to make sure I, of course, believe in Crom and thus the power of the fist and the sword. But I want to make sure Justine and Meghan, that we get in here as well. And I think what we're having is a broader conversation about responsibility of leadership to make sure that people are taken care of, that the most vulnerable people are taken care of. And I think it's fair to say in the world of faith, like vulnerability is a different thing. There is a vulnerability that parishioners give those in charge of a parish or whatever religious organization. Similarly, we're talking about systemic vulnerabilities that have existed before this. They're now being taken advantage of. And I just want to see, like, Justine, particularly your thoughts, particularly, I was thinking of you when Robert mentioned that it was the Surgeon General, because there's a military veteran sent out to be like, no, we are getting it right. And just where your head's at with this situation.
I mean, I think broadly speaking, there's a lot of interesting things to be discussed here. Like, so on the church aspect, there was something that I had read, aside from like multiple priests being arrested because they're still holding congregations. So there's an interesting discussion there, I think, between church and state, but also that, you know, it's not a surprise that there is a religious agenda sometimes when it comes to policy, right? So like in January, when I think there was like a Catholic convention that was happening in DC, and they opposed same-sex marriage, and they held their reception at, you know, Trump's hotel. So it's like there's this, you can see certain ways of how they're trying to influence like what's going on. But and then on flip side of that, though, like when it comes to how they're congregating, I think it is great that churches are becoming more it gets more creative. So they have the live stream thing, they have the drive-in thing. So it's not like these things aren't possible. And while I am not a deeply religious person, I do believe that it's like you don't have to be in a certain place in order to celebrate your faith. And when I read about like one reverend who said, you know, we can't do what God called us to do on live stream, well, then it's just like, I think it's a lot easier to overcome live stream than, I don't know, like a global pandemic and a lot of people dying. So it's like, there's just a huge responsibility there. And it's weird to like not have the perspective to see that through, to think that like at the end of the day, the value that you are impacting is human life. So like with the whole Navy air, like the carrier issue there, where it's just like, you're really gonna like fire someone for basically doing the one thing a leader should do, like making the most hardest decision there. And whether or not the letter was leaked or not, it's just like he did what you would want any leader to do, and to not just go by the book. And I think
you're referring to the USS
go by the book.
Correct? Sorry, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, sorry. But yeah, same thing is like, you have to, just as we were getting creative with how we can congregate, it's like you have to go outside of the book in order to kind of figure out where to go with this. So like when we were going back and talking about like low income communities and racial issues there, like I thought it was interesting that I think it's Minnesota and Vermont, I want to say, but they classified grocery store clerks as essential workers. So they're actually on the same tier as, you know, emergency services personnel, which means that I think at the very least in terms of the benefits, it means that their children will qualify for emergency private childcare, whereas they wouldn't before. But then when you think about that, like, yes, that's a really great step, but then what happens after all of this is over? Because they're still probably not going to be paid as well. And then even though we are, you know, focusing our sources on, of course, getting healthcare workers the equipment that they need, the PPE that they need, well, you know, grocery store workers are touching all kinds of things that that then go out into the community. So it's like they too need that same protection. And what is in place there? Like, we just have this massive shortage and everything is depressing. But I think and everything's depressing, and this is where I'm going with this. But I think like
solid description.
What's so bizarre in this whole thing is that like the quarantine is showing this class disparity where, you know, your poorest community is now deemed essential while your upper class are able to shelter in place the way that they are told. But their only reason why they are able to do that is because those essential workers.
But I think that's a thing that I keep coming back to, is this, like, we're in almost every problem that presents itself is this, we're seeing this nation of like, yeah, it doesn't actually have to be a problem, but the system is set up for it to be a problem. And you think about, you know, issues with people not being able to, you know, or people not shutting down religious services from a same place of like, it's how we've always done it, you know, firing Captain Frasure. That's what we've always done. You send that letter and you're guilty. That's just how it goes. And straight up to the economy, you see this push, and I think that's intrinsic of an American way of life. And, you know, the push to reopen the economy comes from a place of, to me, and Robert, I'd be interested in your take on this, but it comes from a place of like, well, we could just figure out a way to make sure everyone could stay home and be paid, but we'd really rather just open the markets. Like, it seems like that's where it's coming from on some level.
And that's another thing, is like, I understand American dream, capitalism, all that stuff, but it is like, but your economy is completely dependent on those humans surviving. And so it's like, if we do open it up, it'll become this weird Hunger Games things to me, where it's like, okay, well, let's just see who survives. And, you know, millions of people will die because you wanted to keep the economy going. Well, the economy's not going to be going anyways, because that's like, we shut it down because like just the lack of foresight. And
sorry, kid.
It's just
There might be
crazy.
a pandemic, but we need you to be a social media manager in Midtown right now.
No, I mean, to add to that, what Justine was saying is like something that literally just occurred to me in terms of like the classification purely of people that do have to work as essential workers. Again, going back to your grocery store clerk, postal workers, transit workers, etc. In terms of like other upper classes being able to shelter in place, and those lower class, I hate that, but like being, you know, put on the front line is, you know, very much akin to slavery. And I hate to bring up the Black woman that brings up slavery, but like
Wouldn't be good if I did that.
Yeah, I mean, like, basically slaves, you were utilitarian. You know, you worked until you died, literally on the field, and then somebody else would come and continue to do that job, be it in the house or in the field. And so now what we're seeing is not just necessarily a Black or a chattel type of slavery, but more of an economic slavery, you know, in terms of the fact that like people, like you said, Tom, like, yes, the government could put provisions in place to keep everyone home and just shut everything down for a period of time to keep people safe and then reopen the doors. But that is not what's going on, because like there's no respect for human life except for how that human life can acquire a commodity or, you know, a dollar.
Well, I mean, I would say, I think I would say, I don't completely disagree with that, but I would phrase it slightly differently. Those, I don't agree with these folks, but the argument that many of those who actually oppose the current shelter in place is not that they, oh, hey, we just hang back and, you know, and let the serfs and so forth be the essential workers and work. Their arguing is that the economy needs to get back up to speed as soon as possible, because, and I'm making the best case argument here, the economy needs to get back into place as soon as possible, because when we've seen, yes, it's difficult for those essential workers out there. But when we have, you know, we're now 17 million and counting, we're probably closer to 20 or 22, 23 million who are out of work. The long-term impact of that on those individuals and society at large is going to be so catastrophic that even as bad as all the deaths that we've had so far, you know, 20,000 and counting as of this weekend, the long-term economic and
Well,
He's
oh man.
Sorry, but
bad reception from California.
A little bit of technical difficulty there. And that's why they're urging, you know, we need to get back. I mean, I think this weekend, the Texas Governor Abbott has already said he's announcing, like, the next few days the business is going to be open, and we're going to end.
We lost you again there,
go
Robert.
ahead.
No, we lost you again there, Robert. No, go ahead, Justine. Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm trying to be less depressing about everything, but I feel like maybe if the data is there, maybe we'll start seeing these things, and maybe some changes will be happening in the long term. Because I think, like, when it comes back to the economy and being worried about the economy, like, the economy has bounced back after every recession. It always recovers, but people don't recover from dying during a pandemic. And I just feel like even when the economy does recover, it's followed by the greatest periods of economic growth. So it's like we don't need to be worried about the economy right now. We're not looking at the right things. But with the data that has been released about like race, I think like Michigan, Illinois, North Carolina, they're all starting to publish data breaking down deaths by race for COVID-19, which is not a thing that we were doing from the start. But if you look at just like in Michigan, African Americans are 14% of the population, but they're 40% of the deaths there. And then in Philadelphia, there was a study where like those who lived in higher income neighborhoods, they were able to get tested for COVID-19 6 times more frequently than those in lower income areas. So it's like all the data is there that we should be, now I'm just getting depressing again, but
it's all right.
But
that's all we have right now.
There's an opportunity.
Sorry,
there's an opportunity in what you're saying, though. I think just in the sense that, like, this is right in our faces now, and we've known this for a long time. But it's the consequences of the way our society is structured are right in our faces, and there will be a moment, I think, when this recedes. But I bet it won't be a very big window for us to try to address that in some way. And actually, I think the only way that probably happens is on a state level, because the federal government is such a mess that until there's a change in government, in a weird way, this all works toward part of the agenda of the Trump administration, I think. But on a state level, I think we can put pressure and ask these questions. Why is our society structured this way? Why are the ones that we are calling essential the ones that have no health care, no low wages? They are often in the worst situation, but they're the ones we counted on in this. You know?
Yeah.
Meghan O'Malley, I'm getting you in here, because as the white man who dominates this society, I have marginalized you. That's on me, and I apologize. But I wonder. I'm curious, and I think everyone should be getting on this question. But I'd be interested to start with you, knowing how public facing your work is. How would you feel about being told to go back to work right now?
No. I'm not on board because right now I work 2 jobs. So one of my jobs I'm able to do at home, an administrative assistant at a nonprofit theater organization. Great. And we are doing a lot of work because now we have to try to figure out how to make theater continue in a world where people can't go to the venues. But then my other job, I'm a bartender. So, and I bartended, my last shift was March 15th. It was that Sunday, and I was so thankful. I worked the daytime shift, and I was like, great, there's not going to be a lot of people in, because even though we were wearing gloves and like had sanitizer, I felt so uncomfortable being there. Even though I only had 2 hours of like people being in there and we were all keeping distance, it was weird. No, I don't think that we need to be going anywhere, or like stay still. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe we follow Broadway, what they're saying right now. They're saying June 7th. And that's the earliest, meaning if they're going to be opening up on June 7th with shows, they'll be going back into the actual theaters probably as of June 1st, if it was a show that was already in place, and then it would be 3 weeks for the new shows to kind of get together.
Meghan, I give you $100 to call the governor of Texas and say, do what Broadway's doing.
Well, I mean, it is interesting. Even the theater in Texas, like Dallas Theater Center, Theater Center.
You could have said either. I'd have believed you.
Dallas, they're doing a lot of their shows online, and they're like one of the big theaters that's actually like starting that. So it's like, Texas is a weird state.
It is.
Texas is a real weird.
Few states really reflect America in all of its overpopulated cities and angry rural areas like Texas.
The whole they say.
Yeah, no, man. And they will tell you that. My sister lives in Texas, and now all the time it's like, well, it's different here. I'm like, yeah, I know it's different here. Every state in America is different, except Delaware, which is just more of Pennsylvania. Sorry, Delaware.
No.
Speaking of Delaware, let's transition real quick. The Democrats have a presumptive nominee, Vice President Joe Biden. 70. If you like people in their 70s having power, I got some good news for you. A year from today, we'll still have the oldest president we've ever had, no matter who wins. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because there's not a lot to say, but Bernie Sanders, the oldest candidate in the race, dropped out this week or suspended his campaign. He's keeping it going to get delegates on the ballot at the convention. And I have a leading question, a loaded question here, which is 4 years ago, it was a big debate because Bernie Sanders kind of hung in more or less up until maybe 2 weeks before the Democratic convention back in 2016. This time around, he is suspended now. What's different this time? What about the situation this time made him say, I'm going to let this person have this, do we think? Everyone can feel free to chime in on that.
Wait, repeat the question.
No problem. Why 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders dropped out of the Democratic primary, maybe a week before, 2 weeks, somewhere in the very shortly before the convention. This time around, he's dropped out with a few months to go. Like now, part of it is we've seen he does have a sort of Joe Biden had an insurmountable delegate lead. Like Bernie Sanders would have to win all of the remaining races by wide margins to come close. But what's different this time around that made him decide to drop out now rather than sort of take his case, maybe not all the way to the convention, but close? What are thoughts on how that went down, if any? It's fine. I don't really have a strong opinion on this. Robert, take it away.
Well, I'm not a Democrat. On the other hand,
heard about it.
Yeah, neither. Then again, neither is Bernie Sanders. So
you and Bernie, yeah.
It allows me to.
You heard it here first. Robert George, Democratic Socialist. Go ahead.
It allows me to weigh in here. I think number one, in this crisis moment, it's impossible to continue in the natural way of campaigning as you normally would, because obviously you can't do any rallies. Everybody's been told to stay at home. So just on that basic, it's problematic. And also, I think a number of Democrats were reminding him that even though a number of primaries have been postponed and been pushed back, the scenes of people, of loyal Democrats coming out to vote this past Tuesday in Wisconsin with these long lines because the poll workers understandably stayed home. They didn't want to get ill, which meant in Milwaukee you went from 180 polling station to 5, and that allowed long lines. They did their best to have social distancing, but you're literally putting voters in danger. I mean, remarkably, they still had a pretty strong turnout with all of those factors there. So I think Sanders realized he's not going to catch Joe Biden, and that was something that he recognized 2 or 3 weeks ago in terms of the way the delegates work, and to keep an active campaign going, urging people to come out and vote when their health, their well-being, and their lives could quite literally be in danger. He recognized, that's absurd, and also for many Democrats and Republicans and independents who think that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the country, and the most important thing is getting him removed from office in November. Sanders realizes there would be a high cost to him personally and to his supporters if it looked like they were a significant reason for Donald Trump being reelected.
I guess I'll go with a different question. I think this is a better direction going. Was it weird to see people was it as weird for everyone else to see people voting in the middle of this, to see these lines? And adding the fact that I think we kind of downplay the political process more than we should. I don't know, we downplay it. We treat it in a very odd way, which is to say like voting is sacred, and we kind of say like, oh, no one should go out and vote in this, and no one should go out and vote in this, but voting is also what we do instead of war, you know. Like the alternative, this is how you choose a new leader, is either voting or violent overthrow, and the stakes are the same. But seeing those lines was jarring, and on the one hand it was inspiring for me to be like, look at these people risking their lives. And on the other hand, all I can think is we got to figure something out before November if this doesn't resolve itself, because this is dangerous.
Yeah.
And yet the president seems to think that voting by mail is immoral or wrong, or it's so bad. Like of the things that this guy has done in his life, it is amusing to me that he reacted to the idea of vote by mail the way most of us react to his entire life history. Just this look of like vote by mail, and we're like, all of those things you did to women. I don't know. How are we feeling about this fall's election? Good? Bad?
I really hope, I mean, this is probably not going to happen, but my hope is that somebody with an ounce of genius is going to use this downtime as an opportunity to create an online voting system. If we can do the census online, then why can't we vote online? It like doesn't make any sense. Now, obviously that unfortunately would take away, you know, those individuals who don't have access to a computer in their home. The hope would be, you know, that they could maybe have like a opportunity at a library or, you know, some other public institution like a voting place that would have the internet set up. But I guess the argument against that is like, oh, we could be more vulnerable to hacks and, you know, that sort of thing, which is, yes, very true. But, you know, as like in The Office, the show The Office, that is, there was an instance where like they were at like a viewing party of Glee, and they were supposed to be like recording like with the DVR the show, because Jim changed the channel and then came back, and everybody was mad because like they didn't know what the song was that they were singing, and they were like, why would you ever have a DVR? It's like, we're living why you would have a DVR, right? So we're living right now why we should have online voting systems, because like we are putting people physically at risk to like have them physically go out and continue this tradition.
I'll say I would say with a Russia that's as active as it is, I am more comfortable with voting by mail than I am by online voting right now.
Sure.
I feel like online voting is like, wow, Donald Trump won 96% to 4%.
Sure, yeah.
4% was write-in for isn't Trump great?
Meanwhile, let's not forget that one of the potential victims of the coronavirus is the
is everyone running for president?
which is the post office, which apparently, if it doesn't get an infusion of about $25 billion over the next couple of weeks, it could go completely bankrupt. Now, Trump says he doesn't think that he blames mismanagement for the post office's problems, and he says he doesn't think that they need the extra money and blah 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 blah. But that's an argument that's not even going to work amongst Republicans, because while there are a number of Republicans that are opposed to the idea of exclusive voting by mail, they also know that there are also a number of their older voters, who are the most reliable voters, who say, you know, they live part of the year in, say, New York and live part of the year in Florida. And oh, yes, like Donald Trump, they vote actually in Florida. And yes, like Donald Trump, they vote by absentee ballot, which you still need the U.S. Post Office for. So my sense is they're going to have to do that. We're the way the system is right now, we're not going to be able to get to 100% voting by mail the way a number of Democrats want to. But there is, I think there is leeway to expand the absentee ballot options and make no excuse absentee balloting allowed, and then it's up to the parties to get their voters to understand this and get the ballots to them and make sure they send them back. But that's
optimistic till that part.
Optimistic, yeah, he
optimistic till the part where the parties had to do stuff. Meghan, you had a strong visceral reaction on your face to the notion of Donald Trump's lack of caring about mail-in voting. Curious your thoughts.
God, I don't even know what my thought was at that point.
Sure. Just rage.
Yeah, I mean, just everything he does. It's just like Michelle, I also have stopped listening to press conferences, only Cuomo. And he hasn't said anything about mail, so I don't know about this topic.
Oh, fair enough. We're running a little bit low on time, but I want to real quick make sure, Jim or Justine, if you have thoughts on the election this fall or mail-in voting or how doomed we are before we move to what's next. Jim, you guys can mail in California, right? Is that fun?
We are getting mail. Yeah. Although
I'm saying you can mail in your ballots in California. You don't have to actually leave your house to vote, right? Is that true?
It is true. Although like I was supposed to do that for the primaries and it never came. And when I asked like, what's with that? Apparently it isn't working well yet.
Oh, that's good.
I don't know what to think about the fall election. Like, I guess Biden's the nominee. I don't know. It feels, because everything else feels up in the air. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up not being the nominee. Right. And I don't mean that he's going to die. I just mean like, is it really going to be him? I don't know. Let's wait and see. Everything else is strange.
We're all voting for Chris Cuomo in 3 months.
Like, weirder things could happen, it seems to me, at this point. And I'm glad that Sanders stepped down because of the Wisconsin thing. I think that's a case in point. Him being in the race gives people a reason to go to the polls that is completely unnecessary and just risks so many people's lives. I also liked, he was on Colbert, I think, the night he announced his, he was stepping down. Yeah, suspension. He was great. And I actually thought, the things that he was saying speak exactly to the moment that we're living in. Like, all the problems we're seeing are things that he's been talking about. And he might actually have more power and play, not as the candidate, weirdly, than is trying to fight Biden and that machine to become the candidate.
And Joe Biden, the day after Bernie dropped out, Joe Biden expanded his Medicare plan, lowering eligibility to 60 years old. So by the time the summer comes around, we may have Medicare for all who want it. Oh, where did I hear that?
Medicare for as many as we can get. And Joe Biden wrote some really nice things about Bernie Sanders, which, as my sister Caroline Brennan put, you can always count on two old men to eventually be okay with each other, so long as neither of them are a woman running for president. America, it's terrible. Anyway, before we call it a day, I put a question to the panel for something to read, watch, listen to, do while you're cooped up inside. We'll go around in a second, but I'll go first. And I watched a movie last night that was not a great movie, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. It's a movie called Anna and the Apocalypse. It's on Amazon Prime. It is a Christmas musical, zombie musical. It's a zombie.
No, it is not. Are you serious?
It is. And it's made by first of all, it was made by the Scottish. So immediately different. The first half hour kind of dragged at the top. But once it got going, it was really strong. And I was surprised at how affected I was by a movie that is essentially about people saying like, oh, this horrible external set of affairs have turned our entire world upside down. There's long scenes of characters isolated somewhere and, thinking of the people they love. And I was surprised at how moving it was. And there's a lot of great blood and gore and violence in it. So if you like musicals and zombies getting beaten up with baseball bats and the British, Anna and the Apocalypse, it's good enough. I feel bad. The screenwriter passed away, so calling it good enough makes me feel like a jerk. It was a pretty good movie. Amazon Prime, if you got it. Justine, something you're reading, watching, doing right now, to bide the time while we're stuck inside.
So again, I'm trying not to be super depressing, but this article that really got to me was in the New Yorker, and it's called The History of Loneliness. But hear me out, guys.
Is this a drawing of Justine?
Just hear me out. Like, a lot of people are dealing with loneliness during this shutdown. Everyone deals with it a little bit differently. Being lonely is different from being isolated or, you know, enjoying your solitude. And I think like there is going to be a mental health impact of this to the point of like PTS levels. And I think it's something that people are looking out for. There's a lot of studies on it, but I think it's a very good article. But, you know, like watch a cartoon afterwards or a dog video or something. The History of Loneliness. It was in the April 6th issue, The New Yorker.
Thank you, Justine. Jim, something you're reading, watching, doing, listening to.
Well, maybe I've got the cartoon to watch after you read that article. I've been watching Steven Universe. I'm obviously a very late adopter to that. It just finished, I think, and it's the first 4 seasons are on Hulu, 10-minute episodes. Just a beautiful show, and it has been for me like a moment of zen. Like every time I watch it, I just feel so much better. It's just about, and if you don't know it, it's about a little boy who kind of has superpowers, and he's being raised by 3 women who do have superpowers, and it's sort of them saving the universe, and him basically saving the universe by just being like a really sweet kid. And so it's got nothing to do with anything going on, and it's a great form of escape.
Thank you.
And what is it called again?
Steven Universe.
Okay. And what platform is it on?
It's on,
Hulu.
the first 4 seasons are on Hulu, and then the rest, which is I think like 2 seasons, is on iTunes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Megan O'Malley, what are you reading, watching, doing, listening to?
Thank you for asking. It's an exciting
It's good to
time
be here.
catching up on things that have been on the list, such as I finally finished Beverly Hills 90210. I did it. Now, not all the episodes are on Hulu right now because of like, what's the artist stuff? I don't know.
The music rights?
Yeah. There's a lot of rights issues because David is as we all know, David's a DJ, so he has musicians playing, and some of them were like, just kidding, we don't want to be associated with that. So a lot of weird episodes are missing, but you catch up really fast. Yeah, so I did that, and I'm on Taxi right now too.
That's a great show. Oh man, if you want to be depressed,
It's a good show.
I'm actually
it's a great show, but the ending credits of Taxi is just sad music while a cab drives over the bridge.
It's not sad. It's soothing.
All right.
It's pretty sad and soothing.
We have a different outlook on the world, I guess. Michelle Thomas, what are you reading, watching, doing right now to keep?
Yes. Hey. So before we got into the coronavirus lockdown, I was reading Gary David Goldberg's book, Sit Ubu Sit, you know, the thing that comes after like our beloved shows. He is the creator of Family Ties, and I was like, as a result, I had been watching Family Ties. It holds up, guys. I also have been, I finished the Neverending Story audiobook, which you'd be surprised to know that the movie that most of us know is very different from the actual book in terms of like, the movie only covers maybe like a third of the book, and it's a contrived ending that, you know, they just put together for the movie. I really enjoyed it. And also I would say Little Fires Everywhere was great, and Self-Made was good as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. And Robert George, I assume Diagnosis Murder this week. What are you going to tell us to watch?
People who've been following, people who've been keeping track of this wonderful little show that we've been putting together here have been following me on my psychological journey of different TV watching. I've gone in just a few weeks from Murder, She Wrote to Watchmen, and this week I'm not sure what. Jim was talking about catching on to things when people have been raving about for several years, and I finally started watching. The week of the season of the series finale, I finally started watching Schitt's Creek, which is a it's a great sitcom of a family that was wealthy and they lose everything, and they end up having to figure out how the other half lives in this little town that they didn't realize they owned until after they had lost everything. And I've gone through the first season. The first five seasons are on a number of platforms, but primarily Netflix. And I'll have to go through all those, but it's just great. And at the same time, because I'm in a similar kind of cynical mood, I'm catching up with Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is is a classic of another nature. And I will also just kind of recommend, in terms of something that of a classic that people should read if they haven't already, is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which it doesn't matter what happens in society. It was written in 1938, 39, maybe 1940, and it still amazingly manages to speak to contemporary times. And so, if you're quarantining, that is literally a great book, a great classic. If you haven't read it, read it. If you have read it, read it again.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Thank
also,
you very much, Robert George. Go ahead, Michelle. Yes, and then Megan.
No,
Sorry, I'll
Megan.
go back in that order.
Oh yeah. Also, I've been hate watching Dark Shadows with a friend.
It's a good show.
Like we watch it and we kind of like do Mystery Science Theater, 3000 commentary over it while we watch it.
Great.
Soap opera where they threw a vampire in midway through because they were like, "This is boring. Throw me a vampire in there."
Still at the very beginning.
A vampire shows up. I'm not
yes,
spoiling
he
it.
told
Trust
me.
Megan, you had one more thing.
Yeah, also, if you want to experience free theater, the National Theater, if you go to their website, they're putting out a play a week of past performances.
Ow.
Also, Andrew Lloyd Webber, he launched a YouTube page this week, and so he's going to put up one of his shows. It'll be up for 48 hours, and then you can see another one.
Oh, wow.
That's really cool.
And one other thing too.
Go ahead, everyone. Do your second rounds now. Sure.
We have become. We've only been doing this. We've been doing this for 4 weeks, but the electoral dysfunction, quarantined, was clearly so influential that it terrified Saturday Night Live into coming back, and they're doing their own kind of a Zoom. I don't know what platform they're using, but they're coming back tonight to do something. They're coming back just to show that hey, they felt threatened. So hey.
Look, my YouTube subscriber base went from 0 to 6 over the course of the last 4 weeks. That's a 600% increase. So with that, we're going to call it a day and leave it there. Thank you very much, Justine Davie, for your time. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Jim McDermott. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Megan O'Malley, for being here. Thank you, Michelle Thomas, for being here. Thank you, Robert George, as always. And I want to say a real quick thanks to our friend Kevin Scott for creating the animation to open the show. Thank you to Joanne Harris for the music. Thank you to Declan Shalvey and Jordi Bellaire for designing the really awesome Electoral Dysfunction Eagle. Thanks Chris Booth for stopping by earlier. And thank you to my buddy, my pal, Ned Thorne, for packaging these together. Now, as a special Easter treat, we're going to throw it over to Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where our buddy David Frasure has a special treat for you. Take it away, David Frasure. Ned Thorne, star wipe us over there.
Hello, all of you Tom Brennan fans and Electoral Dysfunction fans. My name is David Frasure. Tom asked me if I would play some music for you all as part of the Easter weekend Electoral Dysfunction show. I'm very excited to do that. He also told me that he would give me a couple minutes of video and that I could feel free to poke fun at him and or the show. But truthfully, I don't want to do that because Tom Brennan is about as good of a guy as they make him. And he produces one of the most successful and longest running improv shows in the whole country. So Tom, it's a pleasure to know you, and thanks for having me be a part of the show. And looking forward to seeing you again and working with you again in the near future. This instrument that you're looking at, this is called a marimba. It is the North American version of a traditional 15th century West African instrument. It's kind of like a xylophone's big older brother. If you remember those little baby xylophones that you had growing up, this is what happens if you feed it and water it every single day. You get one of these. I'd like to play for you a piece that was composed originally in the year 1717, written for cello. It was composed by Johann Sebastian Bach, and this is one of his most famous pieces that he ever wrote, and it's called Cello Suite Number 1, and this is the prelude in G major. I hope you like it. Happy Easter weekend, everybody.